Reporting from the Wall Street Journal reveals that the Pentagon has ordered the National Guard to create what's known as quick reaction forces in every state and U.S. territory that are trained to respond to riots and civil unrest within the United States. According to the Pentagon directives, as many as 500 soldiers in each state or territory will be assigned to deploy on short notice and receive non-lethal training in crowd control, handling of detainees, and the use of batons, stun guns, as well as body shields. The news came the very same day that President Trump said courts will not stop him from using troops against U.S. citizens. Trump said so while talking to reporters aboard Air Force One.
What did you mean last night when you said you were prepared to send more than the National Guard into American cities?
Sure, I would. I would do that if it was necessary. You know, if it was necessary, I'd do that, but it hasn't been necessary. We're doing a great job without that, but yeah, if it was necessary. As you know, I'm allowed to do that, but you know, if I want to enact a certain act, I'm allowed to do it routinely, and about 50% of presidents have used that, as you know, and I'd be allowed to do whatever I want. But we haven't chosen to do that because we're doing very well without it. But I'd be allowed to do that, you understand that. And the courts wouldn't get involved, nobody would get involved, and I could send the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, I could send anybody I wanted, but I haven't done that because we're doing so well without it.
I could send anybody I wanted. The words of the President of the United States, David wrote. And first of all, there's already real legal questions about sending the National Guard to these cities and states without the governor's approvals. But now he's talking about active duty military. That's what he said. Army, Navy, the like. This is an extraordinary escalation, potentially, in the President of the United States using the military against U.S. citizens on U.S. soil.
It's posse comitatus. It's a law that says the federal armed forces cannot go into states to perform law enforcement functions. So it's back to this whole definition of is there a riot going on or not. But this is absolutely an escalation. This is part of this strategy that some say is sort of normalizing having troops on the ground in these different countries. This is federalism. You know, the governor in every state controls the National Guard. They call them out in terms of natural disasters or if there are protests that got out of control. And when he talks about, I'm not sure if 50% of presidents have done it, and if they've done it at the request of a governor. So this is enormous flexing of federal power that isn't part of, you know, what I remember in terms of American history. So it's really extraordinary. And it just sets, I think it creates a sense of unease, but this is what he's, you know, the message he's decided to send.
And John Heilemann, a sense of unease, perhaps the point, and to what David just said, the idea of almost desensitizing Americans to the presence of troops on city streets. And certainly already there are legal questions about this, but I know some Democratic governors and other officials have flat out said this is dangerous and illegal in its own right, but it's also setting the stage for putting these troops, they believe, on city streets ahead of next year's midterms, perhaps to try to intimidate and suppress the vote.
Yeah, I mean, Jonathan, this is something we've been saying for a little while here. There's the guys at Axios did a good thing the other day where they talked about Jim and Mike did a thing where they talked about the kind of incredible number of places in which Trump has essentially taken the attitude and pursued policies in line with the attitude of, I'm the president, I can do whatever I want. And, you know, we've talked for years about the expanding purview of executive power in America, but Trump is so far at the extreme of that. This is clearly one of the largest areas where that's the case, right? And David is being falsely modest when he says, you know, as American history as I remember it, it is the case that, you know, when Trump decided to nationalize the National Guard, to federalize the National Guard in California and Los Angeles, the first of these moves, it was the first time that a president had overridden the wishes of a governor of a state since back in the civil rights era when troops were federalized to try to integrate some of the schools in Alabama and other states in the South. So there is not in our lifetimes a precedent for this, and Trump has not just done it once, but is now doing it pretty much everywhere. And I think that is raising the specter you're talking about, which is in the medium term, is this part of a strategy to try to steal effectively, or at least put your thumb very, very firmly on the scale of the 2026 midterm elections, but also with the normalization project. Jonathan, we're not even a year in, and we've had multiple cities where we've seen this happen. In the course of the next 3 years is the longer term objective to get to a place where troops on American streets have become so normalized that not only has the 2026 midterms been affected, but that the 2028 presidential election could be affected, with Trump basically saying the whole country's in a state of emergency and I'm going to declare martial law and not have the 2028 presidential election. That is the fear of a lot of people in the progressive camp, that is where it's going. And I don't mean just wild-eyed progressives. I mean, a lot of Democratic governors are already starting to whisper that and say that to reporters, that's where they think this is really headed over the course of the next 3 years.
Yeah, no, that sentiment is out there, a terrifying one, and one that will be worth, obviously, keeping an eye on in the months, years ahead. John.